Hi everyone, it's Rebecca here from Feather Stitch House, and we're back again with episode 5 of Winging It. If you're joining us for the first time, you are very welcome, and if you want to revisit any of our earlier episodes, you can find them all in the Winging It playlist. I'll put a card at the top of the screen so that you can easily find your way there. This year, January is a 5-Sunday month, and when we have a 5th Sunday, we're going to use it to explore a technique that you can use in your textile work. So this week we're going to be looking at the art of applique. It's simply the art of using layers of fabric to create a picture. There are lots of different types of applique. I'm going to look at 4 in this video, so it will be a little bit of a longer video than usual. I'm going to be working on a slightly larger scale today, so the piece of felt that I'm working on is 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres, and I've marked out a border of 2 centimetres all the way around to create a 16 centimetre square in the centre, and that's the area that I'm going to work in. If you want to follow this design and make your own version of it, the pattern is available as a free download on our website, and I'll try and put a link in the description below so that you can go straight there. This month we've been exploring straight stitch and its variations, and I'm going to continue with that in this video. So I'm only going to be using stitches that we learnt in that tutorial video at the beginning of the month, and if you need to revisit that, I'll put another card above so that you can find your way to the stitch tutorial for January. So let's grab our bits and pieces, grab your fabrics, your needle and thread, and let's get stitching. Okay, applique is one of my favourite techniques to use in my own work, and if you follow me on Instagram you may well have seen these. So this is my most recent landscape hoop. I did a series of landscapes, and all of these fields are appliqued on. So I start with a piece of felt as the base, and then I add on these layers of felt to create fields and those rolling hill shapes of the wolds. So that's an example. Something far more simple is this one. I also did a series of woodland scenes last year, and here we've got a background where I made a black and white background just simply by stitching 2 pieces of felt together, and then I made some rectangles to form tree trunks and then embroidered over the top. But these tree trunks are applique pieces of felt that are added on the surface, and it's just rectangles. There's nothing complicated or mysterious there. And another thing that I did during the summer is this sunflower hoop, which again is just layers of felt appliqued on top of each other, and this really is the simplest form of applique, and this is the one I'm going to show you first. So each of these petals is cut out separately and stitched on and then embroidered over the top, and I'm showing these to show you some different ways that you can use applique, but also to show you how applique and embroidery can work really nicely together, and create loads of really quite intricate looking designs, even though they're very simple. And I've just sketched out a really simple landscape scene, and we're going to add some things over the top, but we've got some hills in the foreground, and we've got this sort of sun with rays coming off it as well. So we're going to do lots of different types of applique. We're going to make our background, then we're going to add some things over the top. Now you can do as much or as little of this as you wish. If you want to stick with your 8x8 piece and maybe try a method that you haven't tried before, you can do that. If you want to copy this design, you can do something similar on a bigger piece, and it's entirely up to you. So use the technique however you wish. So the first thing we're going to do is add in our hills down here at the bottom of our scene, and I've got here some pieces of felt that are in different shades of green, getting paler. So this dark green one is going to be my foreground, this hill here. Then this mid green one is going to be the second hill, and the paler green is going to be this hill in the background. So what I've also done is I've cut out some templates just that match my design, and I just did this with just copy paper that was scrap, and I've just traced over the shapes of my hills and cut them out. Now you might see that I've numbered them because I want to put the background one on first, and then the middle ground, and then the foreground, so that my layers don't look like they're overlapping in the wrong way. Okay, so I'm going to take my first piece of felt. I'll just demonstrate one of these and then I'll add the rest in and show you the finished effect. So this is going to be a clean line on my scene. It's going to hit the blue felt, and so I don't need to worry about that. But these two lines here, these two edges, are going to be covered by something else. So I want to allow a little bit of overlap. So I'm going to put my template very close to the edge, and I'm going to draw around the top line with my heat erasable pen. Now this one is going to be my very edge, so I'm going to actually overlap slightly there, and I'm going to allow an overhang. So I'm going to draw around my shape, but when I cut it out, I'm going to allow for a little overlap, and that will just make sure there's no spaces in my layers of fields. So I'm going to just allow a little bit extra, just in case I haven't cut these out quite right. And I'm going to just number that number 1. So now I'm going to cut my shape out. And I do find if you're cutting fabric, it's great to use a pair of embroidery scissors because you can get really sharp edges. Never throw any of your scraps away. You can use them as filling, you can use them in lots of different ways. So I never throw scraps of fabric or felt away. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And my template, and let's bring our scene back in. Now I'm going to lay this on, bearing in mind that I've allowed overlap. I'm going to lay this on my scene, and I'm just going to pin it in place. So I've got a pin cushion handy, and I'm going to just put a couple of pins in. Now this works a treat with felt. You can't really applique like this with woven fabrics because they fray at the edge. I'm going to show you what to do with woven fabrics, but felt doesn't fray, it just keeps its shape, and you won't get any ragged edges at all. So you can cut it straight out, lay it straight on. And I'm going to get some pale green embroidery thread, and you can use 1 or 2 strands, it's entirely up to you. Right, and I'm going to start with this top edge. Now we're going to use a applique stitch, and it is another straight stitch. There's nothing complicated about it at all. So what I'm going to do is take my needle up from the back just inside the edge of the piece that I'm appliquing on. So I'm going to bring my needle up, and then I'm going to take it down just at the edge like that. So I'm lining my needle up with the edge of my shape, and I'm going to put my needle back through the felt. So I've come up through both layers and down through just one, my base layer. So then I'm going to move along a little bit at the back and bring my needle up just inside my shape and take it down at the edge just through that single layer. And I'm going to work my way around my shape, certainly along that top edge in this way. Try and keep your stitches even, It just makes for a better finish rather than having haphazard stitches. And the idea is that you want your stitches small enough that you can barely see them. And as you go, just keep smoothing down the piece that you're appliquing to make sure you're not sewing lumps into it. Okay, so I've taken my needle through to the back, and I'm going to take my pins out now because that's nice and secure. And I could do the same process all the way around, but I just want to save a bit of time. This is going to be covered, these bottom edges. So what I'm going to do is in that overlap that I allowed, I'm just going to put in some tacking stitches just to hold it in place. So I'm just going to carry on sewing round, but I'm just going to put some running stitch, just quite widely spaced, big running stitches. We're not going to take these out, they're going to be covered up, but I don't need to worry quite so much about the finish of these edges because they will be hidden. Okay, so that's our first shape, and so what I can do now is take my next shade of green and repeat the process with my next field. I'm going to lay my field on top of the first like that. So I'm going to pin it in place. And then I'm going to take my mid-green embroidery thread doing a few more wraps on my knots because I'm only using a single strand. So again, I'm going to come up from the back, make sure the edge of my field is in the overlap from that first field, and I'm going to use my applique stitch just to add this one in place. That's my second field. So you get the idea. I'm going to add the third field on, and then we're going to look at our second type of applique. So this is just simple applique, adding shapes onto a background fabric with applique stitch around the edges of the shape, layering it up on top of each other. And this works really well with non-woven fabrics like felt, because you don't have to worry about it fraying. Okay, so that's our first type of applique. We're going to look at another type of applique now, and we're going to work on the sky and the sun with the rays. And what we're going to look at this time is reverse applique. Now, I've been rooting about for yellow fabrics, and I'm not a massive fan of yellow, so I don't have a huge amount of yellow fabrics. So my first piece is really small, but I'm going to just demonstrate. I thought it would be a good opportunity to show you what to do if you don't have big enough pieces. So I've got a piece of yellow gingham here that's just big enough to cover the sun, and reverse applique basically is exactly what it sounds like, where we cut away rather than adding fabric on. We cut fabric away to reveal what's underneath. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer my fabric behind where the sun is, and you probably can't see, but I've got a light here that allows me to just see through the felt a little bit, so I can position my piece of fabric correctly. So that is in the right place. I'm just going to put a pin in the middle, and this time I'm going to start on the front because we want our knot on the surface so it's easy to take off. And I'm just going to tack that piece of fabric in place. So I'm just going to finish off that, and again I want my knot on the surface so that my tacking stitches are easier to remove. Okay, so I'm going to take that pin out now. Now what I've got here is some yellow fabrics that are just big enough to cover that top half, and I've got 3 different yellow fabrics here. So I've got a sort of creamy one with gold stars, I've got a polka dot, and I've got this, I don't know whether you can pick up the shimmer, but it's got a bit of gold in it printed onto the surface that I quite like. So I'm going to make a sandwich like that. I'll actually have 4 layers because I've got the layer that I've already put on as well. And I'm just going to lay my fabric over the top of those 3 layers, my felt. So I've got my fabric sandwich under here and I've got my felt over the top, and I'm just going to pin it, and we're going to tack around the edge just like we did with that small piece. So again, I'm going to use my border that I've left. That's one of the reasons why I added a border to my square that I'm working on, and I'm going to go through all the layers. So I'm going right the way through all 3 layers of fabric and the felt, just to attach them together. So I've got my fabric sandwich, I've got my little patch in the middle, and then my large pieces of fabric around the outside like that. So I've just got layers and layers and layers there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to secure the felt to the fabric so that when we cut felt and fabric away, it doesn't all fall apart. So I've got some yellow embroidery thread here, and we're going to try and stick with straight stitches all the way through this piece as well, because it is our stitch of the month. I'm going to use 2 strands this time, and I'm going to start with the sun in the center. So I've got the outline, this is my cutting line, this is where I'm going to cut eventually. So I want to go just beyond that cutting line, and I'm going to come up from the back just beyond my cut line, and I'm just going to running stitch around the edge, and I'm going to keep my stitches quite small and quite close together. Okay, so I'm hoping that you can see that I've got some yellow stitching all the way around the edge of that inner circle. So what I want to do now is cut away this circle up to the cut line. So the stitches are going to be just outside the cut line and will keep us secure. All right, so things won't fall apart. The best thing to use for this is actually a seam ripper, just to get you started. So I'm just going to put it in fairly horizontally because I don't want to dig down, otherwise I'll cut my fabric underneath. So I'm going to go just slide it in horizontally and just make a little hole, and I can see my gingham fabric underneath there. So now I'm going to get my scissors in, and I'm going to carefully work my way around, just little cuts until I can get my scissor blades in a little bit more, and I'm just going to work my way around that cut line. Just being really careful that I'm not going through a layer of fabric underneath. So I'm just cutting the felt. You do need decent scissors for this. You need to be able to cut right to the tip. So that's the piece I've taken out, and I've revealed my yellow gingham underneath, and that's essentially reverse applique. That's all it is. Now I'm going to take out my tacking stitches around there just so that I can get a better sense of what my applique is looking like. So that's my first shape. So you can go around again with different shades of yellow. If you want to, you can make this quite decorative. You could put a decorative stitch around there. I'm just going to show you one more because I want to show you how the different layers work. So I've got my yellow sun in the middle there. I'm just going to follow one of the rays. So if I do this one here, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing again. I think I'm going to sew on the line this time. So again, I'm going to do running stitch around my shape, keeping my stitches quite close together. Okay, so I've stitched around my first sun ray, and we're going to do the same thing again, but we are going to go through more layers. So I'm going to just follow the same process to get my felt out of the way. So I'm going to cut away my felt first. Make sure you don't go quite up to your stitches, because otherwise you run the risk of accidentally cutting them. And because I've got layers of fabric here, I can have my rays different colours. So let's just get rid of this first layer of felt. Okay, so the first layer is, you can just see at the edge, the first layer I've got is my gold layer. So I can leave that gold, or I can cut through another layer. Just going to tidy that up, a bit of fluff. There we go. So I'm going to cut through another layer just to show you how to do it. So again, I'm using my seam ripper, and I'm just making sure I'm only inside that first layer of fabric, and I'm going to follow my guideline on my felt, and I'm going to cut away that gold layer. To reveal my polka dot layer underneath that. So we've cut away the top layer, the surface layer of the felt, and we've cut away our next layer of fabric as well to reveal this polka dot. So I'm going to have my rays being different colour. So I'm going to get on and do my rays, and then I'll come back and show you where we're up to. Okay, so here's our finished reverse applique. Just to recap, we've done just simple felt applique with a non-woven fabric, and now we've done reverse applique. So the next thing we're going to do is add some trees, and we're going to do this with a third technique that's called needle turned applique. And I've cut out some tree shaped templates, just really simple tree shapes. I'm going to do 3, and I've copied these, I've drawn around them on a piece of freezer paper, and it's paper, normal paper on one side, but the other side, I don't know if you can see, it's got a gloss to it. It actually has wax on it. And so what we're going to do is use these shapes to create applique with cotton fabric. So this is a method for woven fabrics. I've got a few examples of green fabrics here, and these are what I'm going to make my trees out of. So the first thing I need to do is cut my shapes out of my freezer paper. So I've got my triangular one here. I'll just demonstrate with one. And let's start with this green fabric here. So what I'm going to do is lay my freezer paper on top, wax side down. So I've got the papery side facing me and the wax side is directly onto my fabric, and I've just got a little ironing pad here. And what I'm going to do is make sure there's a border to the top and the side of my shape. I'm actually going to put that on a diagonal, I think, like that. And so I've got my wax touching my fabric and the paper facing up, and all I'm going to do is just press an iron onto that. And what's going to happen is the wax is going to melt off the paper and stick the paper to the fabric, just temporarily. It's not like glue, it's quite a light finish. So that is stuck on now, and I'm going to just cut around my shape, leaving a little bit of a border. So I've got my shape with the wax paper attached, and I've cut out a little bit of a border. Before you even start, what we need to look at is where there are curves and corners, because we're not going to be able to easily fold that under without snipping it. So where you've got an internal corner, like here, you just need to snip into the corner, going to just a couple of threads of weave. So I've made a little snip there, just into the corner of where the tree turns into a tree trunk. So I'm going to do that on the other side, and wherever, if you just look at where my scissor tip is going, you can see it's very, very close, but not quite up to the corner. Now we've also got some curves here, and again we've got to think about what's going to happen with the fabric when we're turning it under. So I'm just going to put in a couple of little snips in a similar way around those curves, and again at the top. This is just going to help us get a nice clean shape on our applique, and again down here. Okay, so that should be enough. Now I'm going to bring back in my seam. I'm going to put my tree about there, so I'm going to pin it in place just with one pin in the center, because I want plenty of space around the edge for my turning in, for my overlap to go under. So that template should stay in place nicely for you while you're working. And I'm going to start on a straight edge because that's the easiest place to start. And what I'm going to do is use my needle to tuck the overlap underneath the shape up to the edge of the paper. Okay, so I've got my, if I hold it on the side you might be able to see a little bit better. So I've just folded under, tucked under my overlap up to the edge of the paper to form a sort of hem, I suppose, to cover up my raw edges. And I'm going to use my applique stitch in exactly the same way that I did with this applique here, and I'm just going to stitch around the edge. So this is a method to use for woven fabrics, because obviously you want to tuck those raw edges away so that they don't fray and look untidy. So I'm just going to put in tiny stitches. I've just got one strand of embroidery thread here. If your tuck becomes a little bit loose, you can just use your needle to pull it back under, just to keep your shape nice and sharp. we're now up to the point where we're turning around that sharp corner. So those little snips that I made are going to help me get a nice shape at the top. So I'm just going to tuck each little wedge under in turn and put a couple of stitches in it so that I follow the shape of my paper and just get a nice neat finish. And then I'm going to work all the way around onto this second straight edge now. So I'm going to work my way back down using my needle to turn the fabric under. I should have said on the outside corners, a little trick is to just cut across the corner like that, just to take some of the fabric out so that you can you don't have lots of bulk at the corners. So I'm just going to do that retrospectively. Quite like the way that this method gives you a little bit of a reveal, because at the moment we can't actually see the effect because the paper's in the way, but when I peel the paper off you'll see that it comes off very easily and gives a lovely finish. Okay, so we can take the pin out, and I'm trusting that this is going to look good because I can't see any better than you can. So we're going to take the pin out and we're just going to peel off the paper, and it's actually, with the stitching, it's worked itself loose, so it's really easy to lift off. And there you can see we've got our little tree sitting nicely on the surface. So I'm going to add the other two in exactly the same way, and then I'll come back and show you our final technique. Right, so we've got our 3 trees appliqued on, and so that's how we do needle turned or turned edge applique. They're not going to stay quite this stark. We are going to add some embroidery over the top. So there's one more type of applique that I'm going to show you, and that uses this magic material here, and this is called Embroidery. Now this is a paper glue that you iron on. So one side of it is just paper, it's a bit like the wax paper, but rather than wax on the other side, you can actually, if you hold it to the light, you can see it's got a rougher side. That side is a glue that melts when you iron it and sticks to your fabric. Now, there's a couple of things you need to remember when you're using Bondaweb. One is to always use something between the Bondaweb and the iron. So I keep a little bit of greaseproof paper handy that I use for ironing. The other is that everything you Bondaweb will be reversed. So you're going to iron the glue onto the wrong side, and then you'll turn it over and iron it again once you've taken the paper off, and the glue will remelt and stick it to your base. So you need to make sure, particularly if you're cutting out letters, you've got to reverse them before you attach the Bondaweb, otherwise they'll all be backwards when you iron it down. So if that doesn't make sense, hopefully it will when we get going. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some flowers along the bottom of my scene. So I'm going to create a little bit of glued fabric. I'm just going to move my panel out of the way, and I've got some just little scraps of fabric here that I'm going to use to cut my flowers out. So I'm just going to trim them up a little bit and arrange them over my Bondaweb on the gluey side. All right, so I'm putting the wrong side of the fabric onto the glue. So the glue side's up on the Bondaweb and the right side of the fabric is up on the glue. So I'm just going to arrange these so that there's not very much glue showing. Okay, so that's my little panel let's just put a little bit more in there because I can. A little bit of glue showing. Let's just pop that bit in there. This is where you can use up all your scraps because they're all going to get glued, so they all become useful. Okay, I'll bring my ironing pad back and I'm just going to lift that. Should have done it on the ironing pad really. I'm just going to lift that onto my ironing pad and I'm going to lay my greaseproof paper over the top, and I'm just going to hold my iron over it. You don't move the iron around, you're just going to hold the iron down for 10 to 15 seconds. Just got a corner there that wasn't covered. If you move your iron, you're likely to shuffle the pieces around, and I'm going to peel that off, and you can see that those are now fixed onto the bonder web. Okay, so I've got glue on the back of the fabric. Right, so what I'm going to do is turn it over, and I've got the paper side here, and I'm just going to draw some little flowers. Now I'm going to draw some flowers down here like that. And what's good is you can see through it, so you can see what colour you're picking up with your flower shape. Now these ones here, I'm just going to cut around them. Let's have a different shape of flower, and you can be quite rough about this. They're going to look like starfish. Not to worry, let's just embrace it and go with it. So I'm going to cut out a couple of these little flowers here. So I'm just going to cut round the pattern that's already there on the fabric. I'll just do a couple to show you. And I've got my starfish and one of my sort of daisy shapes. And this bit can be a little bit faffy because sometimes it comes off easily and sometimes it really doesn't. So I'm going to just peel off, there we go. I'm going to peel off the paper on each one. And that will leave just the fabric and the glue that's stuck to the fabric that we've ironed on. I find it helps if you fold it. It sort of wants to come off if you fold it. There we go. Okay, so we throw the paper away, and I've got 3 little flowers here that have got glue on the back. So I'm going to bring my applique panel back in, and I'm going to just place my flowers on the grass at the front. And I'm going to make sure I've got the right side up and the glue side down. So hopefully you can see that. And I'm just going to put my greaseproof paper back over the top and iron it again. So I'm just going to hold my iron over the top again, and just a medium heat iron. You don't need any steam, you shouldn't use steam with bonder web, but just a medium iron should do it. And hopefully you can see there that they are now stuck on. Now I could leave them like that, but you can also stitch onto them as well, which is what I'm going to do. So this is raw edge applique, that's what we've just done using bonder web. So the edge of the fabric is not turned under, it's raw, and without the glue it would fray, but because we've put this bonder web on the back, it stopped it fraying and it's able to hold its shape really nicely. It's really secure on there, it won't come off easily. We could leave it like this. I'm going to add some more embroidery over the top. I'm only going to be using straight stitches and the variation of straight stitch that we've looked at through this month, and I'll come back and show you when it's done. Okay, so here's our finished piece. If we just recap over what we've done, we did our raw edge applique to put the fields on, then we did our reverse applique to make the sun and the sun rays, then we did our needle turned or turned edge applique to put the trees in place, and then we used bond web to do raw edge applique with a woven fabric to add these little flowers at the bottom. And you can see that I've done some overstitching. I've only used straight stitch, so I've done some running stitch around the sun rays and around the sun in the middle. I've done a back stitch border all the way around the edge just to hold the edges of the pieces together. I've done some seed stitch on the trees, and then I've just done some straight stitches to create branches and some straight stitches close together to make the trunks. And then I've just added in some little straight stitch details and flowers. This is back stitch, hope you can pick up that. I've just added some sort of furrows in the field in the background, and I've just padded this little bit by adding little crosses, little cross stitches across the mid-ground field just to give it a bit of texture. These are all straight stitch down at the bottom, so I've done some little stars, I've done some little trios of straight stitches, and I've put some stems on and some little blades of grass just to add a little bit of detail. And I've trimmed back those raw edges just to about 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch, just to neaten it up and get it closer to the size that I'm working with. So if you remember, this was 4 times the size of the panels that we've been working on so far, so it's the same proportion, but it's almost like I've put 4 of my 8 centimetre panels together to create this bigger panel. So that's our introduction to applique. Hope you've enjoyed that. The pattern for this piece is available on our website as a free download, and so if you want to make this, you can download that for free and you've got all the templates there. Or you can just play around and do something completely unique and different, all of your own design. I can't wait to see what you produce with your new applique skills, and I'll see you next week for our first February stitch prompt. Okay, happy stitching, have a great day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.